Hi, welcome. I'm Program Manager Holly Shaffer at Edison Ford Winter Estates, and I'm in front of Shibe Park in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, where Connie Mack spent almost 50 years as a manager. I think it was actually about 43 at this particular park, and I'll tell you a lot more. Sometimes it's really hard when you're doing a topic to get as what you consider sufficient information. There is so much information on Connie Mack, occasionally contradictory, that I could do like a 12-part series on him and still not complete it. But I promise I'm not going to do that. We'll keep it to an hour or less. Connie Mack is someone that I greatly admire. And I hope at the end of this presentation you will too. Not just baseball history, but I always believe baseball history is American history. So let's get started. Says Connie Mack, baseball legend. This is from 1927. He's on the cover of Time magazine. And coincidentally, the Athletics are having their spring training here in Fort Myers in 1927. So keep that in mind. Connie Mack was born on December 22nd, 1862 in East Brookfield, Massachusetts. He was the third of 7 children of Michael and Mary McGillicuddy. His father, who had worked in the cotton mills and shoe factories, was serving with the 51st Massachusetts Infantry during the Civil War. And I don't go into the background a lot on his family, but they had a pretty rough life. His father didn't live that long, and he also had a drinking problem. The McGillicuddy family was known as Mack, which was not unusual for people to shorten their name like that, except legally. It was never changed legally. In 1884, Connie Mack, because that's who we're focusing on, played on some minor league teams in Connecticut. I think his first play was in Meriden, Connecticut, before being sold to the Washington Nationals of the National League. And there was no American League then, and ball teams were more often called ball clubs. Baseball was 2 words, etc. And in the winter of 1889, Connie Mack moved to the Buffalo Bisons of the short-lived Players League, investing his entire life savings of $500 in the team. Sadly, the team went out of business after a year, and he lost his job and money. And of course, $500. I mean, it's still a lot for people today, but back then it was a lot of money. In December of 1890, Mack signed a contract with the Pittsburgh, and Pittsburgh was spelled without the H for anybody that was wondering, especially my husband. At the time, but he got a contract with the Pittsburgh Pirates in the National League and remained with them for the rest of his baseball career as a full-time player, now not as a manager. And for 3 years, he became a player manager for the Pirates. The only of the Milwaukee Brewers of the Western League, which was trying to become the other league, National League really didn't want the other league, offered Mack a job as a player manager in the minor league Milwaukee Brewers, and for 3 years, and as a manager for one, finishing in 1900. And there he is as a player for the Senators, Connie Mack, a catcher. And there's lots of interesting stories about his career as a catcher. One thing I remember reading before was that as a player, at one point you could tell them where you wanted the pitch. And he really did well on, I believe it was high pitches. So he would call for it to be a high pitch and he would get to hit it. But that didn't last long. And so then he had a pretty anemic batting average. But he was a great, I guess, game caller, catcher, very innovative. He was one of the first catchers to play directly behind home plate. You're probably wondering, well, where would they have been? But they used to be by the backstop. He was also known for his ability to fake the sound of a foul tip with his mouth, and was so good catching them that the National League changed its rule. So the batter was no longer out if the catcher caught a foul tip with fewer than 2 strikes. He also became skilled at tipping bats to throw off the hitter's swing. And there's a couple interpretations of it. Tipping means delaying the swing, or kind of just gently getting your mitt on it so that the ball misses or doesn't hit it solidly. Another way of saying it is interfering with the ball while it's in play. Since his minor league days, Connie Mack had continued to work on perfecting his distracting chatter. He always seemed to me to be a rather quiet man, but apparently not when he was a catcher. And he would talk and talk and talk to everyone, the players, or whatever it took. Mack biographer Norman Mock wrote that Mack would pretend he was innocent. Hall of Fame catcher manager Wilbert Robinson remembered that Mack never was mean like some of the catchers of his day, but he kept up a string of chatter. So he would just pretend like, hey, me? And if you had any soft spot, any way that you could get under him, say like if it bothered you, if somebody was tapping a pencil, which of course they wouldn't do it during a ball game, but he would do anything it took to get to the player that was up at the plate. That was part of his job. He would do and say things, according to this manager, that would got more under your skin than cuss words used by other catchers. And there's Connie Mack as a young player and later on a manager on the Pittsburgh No-H Pirates. American League President Van Johnson asked Mack to establish a baseball club in Philadelphia. And in 1901, he became manager, treasurer, and part owner of the new American League. Well, Van Johnson, as part of that minor league Milwaukee Brewers, he was trying to get that as the other team. Remember, it kind of took a different form. It became the American League. So he became manager, treasurer, and part owner of the Philadelphia Athletics, along with baseball equipment manufacturer Ben Scheib, who Mack recruited to become president and the team's chief financier. Scheib agreed to buy 50% of the team. Mack had allocated 25% to two sports writers whose voting power he held, giving Mack and Scheib equal power, so basically 50-50. This way, neither one could do anything if the other didn't agree to. However, they never disagreed. And Scheib left the running of the team to Mack. When Mack wanted to buy out the two sports writers' shares in 1912, Ben Scheib loaned him the money instead of letting his sons buy and put 75% of the stock under Scheib control. That's how highly he thought of Connie Mack, because he could have easily done that. And that's from the Society of American Baseball Research. And Scheib will remain the president for 21 years. Though there was already an established team with the National League, the American League Athletics caught on quickly with Philadelphia fans. And in its second year, the team won the American League pennant. And there's Mack. That picture is from 1910. But the time period I'm talking about, when they won the pennant, they win it in 1902. And then there's no World Series then, so that they can't go any higher. When Connie Mack arrived in Philadelphia after being appointed manager and minority stockholder of the Athletics by American League President Van Johnson, he had not only to find money and players, but he also had to build a ballpark. So he is starting from the ground up. Mack and his partner Scheib considered several pieces of property before finding one that was appropriate in Brewery Town, section of Philadelphia. And yes, it was originally named that because of all the beer that was brewed there. Columbia Park, their first home, was built for a cost of $35,000. Its original seating capacity was 9,500. Mack lived in a house across the street from the field. Eventually, many players moved into the neighborhood too. During their time at Columbia Park, the Athletics won 2 American League pennants and finished second twice. The first was in 1902, which I already told you about, and they beat the St. Louis Browns. And because the National League refused to recognize the American League, that will change. There was no World Series that year. A World Series was held at Columbia Park in 1905, with the Athletics losing to the Giants in 4 games. Now, I believe there's also one in 1903, a World Series, but not in 1904. The little wooden stadium did not hold enough people to suit Mack and Shibe. Often as the park filled, the gates had to be shut, leaving thousands of fans outside. The Athletics left Columbia Park after the 1908 season, moving into the newly built Shibe Park. And so there is Mack with the team from 1905. And besides not having enough seats, wooden ballparks are very dangerous. They could easily catch on fire. The Athletics, under the direction of Ben Shibe, built the first steel and concrete stadium known as Shibe Park. It was designed by Shibe and Mack after growing tired of Columbia Park, which could barely hold 9,500 fans. Shibe constructed the new grounds in what was then the outskirts of Philadelphia on the north side, about 4 miles north of Independence Hall and at the corner of Lehigh and 21st Street. It was designed in the French Renaissance style. The exterior featured terracotta brickwork, a dark green slate roof, and a grand rotunda at the main entrance, unanimously hailed at its opening as the greatest ballpark ever built. The 23,000 seat baseball palace cost $500,000 according to some reports, $300,000 according to others. And by the way, it's not going to stay configured like this. They will add seats. They will do things to block people sitting outside on roofs and seeing into the park and so on. The stadium opened on Monday, April 12th, 1909, with both league presidents attending, and invitations sent to all the owners. And you can see how people are, this is like outside there looking in. There's the ballpark, some like a poster for it, and something from that for that season there. And then you can see the ballpark down here and the cupola where Connie Mack would have his office right there. And there's Connie Mack in those early years. I'm going to talk about them in Fort Myers in a little bit, but I just want to mention something. The Athletics are considered having 2 dynasties, but some people believe they're 3. So we'll get to that in a minute. And dynasties meaning when they dominated baseball, and they certainly did. So 1910, Philadelphia Athletics win their first World Series. Is this their first dynasty or maybe their second? Over the Chicago Cubs, 4-1. 4 games to 1. The second dynasty. And this is a very well-known one with a lot of Hall of Famers in it. The Athletics were the American League powerhouse team, winning 6 of the first 14 pennants, including 4 of 5 pennants between 1910 to 1914. And the $100,000 infield, he did have a big payroll at that point. It consisted of first baseman Stuffy McGinnis. Nicknames were really super popular then. Second baseman Eddie Collins, shortstop Jack Berry, and third baseman Frank Home Run Baker. The nickname of the $100,000 infield reflects the purported combined market value of the foursome, which is equal to, that says 2.9 million, but I'll tell you right now, it's more likely to be a little over 3 million. Baseball historian and statistician Bill James rated the 1914 players of the $100,000 infield the greatest infield of all time, and ranked the 1912 and 1913 versions of the top 5 all time. They were swept in the 1914 series by the Boston Braves, and faced with an economic recession and the new Federal League, Mack took the unusual move of selling off the foundation of his championship team. So here's the deal. Some people think that they are better than the 1927 Yankees. That is considered the greatest team of all time. And take a minute, because there's another one, the 1913. What's this? That's Connie Mack in 1914. He was praised in the papers for his intelligent and innovative management. That earned him the nickname of the tall tactician. He had tons of nicknames. He was well respected. He valued intelligence and baseball smarts, and he was always looking for educated players. He traded shoeless Joe Jackson, despite his talent, because of his bad attitude and unintelligent play. Connie Mack, Wikipedia, that's where that's from. He wanted players who were self-directed, self-disciplined, and self-motivated. His ideal player was Eddie Collins, and you know him from those early years. According to baseball historian Bill James, Mack was way ahead of his time and having numerous college players on his team. And so that's where he got most of his players from, a lot of them from college teams. And that's how he filled his ranks. I don't focus a lot on his family. I could spend so much time on his family, on the ball players that he played against, on the stadiums he played in. So I try to kind of balance it all. He had two families. He and his first wife, Margaret Hogan, had two sons, Roy and Earl, and a daughter, Marguerite. Margaret died at 26 in 1892, less than 3 weeks after giving birth to Marguerite. Connie married again in 1910. His wife was younger. His second wife, Catherine Hallahan, gave birth to 4 girls and 1 boy, Connie Mack Jr. Mack had 16 grandchildren, but that number has changed, and he's got great-grandchildren, so that was just what was in print at the time. And there he is with his grandchildren. One of them was Senator Mack, Dennis Mack, son. I think these are all children of Connie Mack Jr. or Connie Mack II. Connie's conduct for the Philadelphia A's after the 1916 season, and I will explain the significance of that. But let me read what it says. I'll always play the game to the best of my ability. I'll always play to win, but if I lose, I will not look for an excuse to detract from my opponent's victory. I will never take an unfair advantage in order to win. I will always abide by the rules of the game on the diamond as well in my daily life. I will always conduct myself as a true sportsman on and off the playing field. I will always strive for the good of the team rather than my own glory. And I'll never gloat in victory nor pity myself in defeat. I'll do my utmost to keep myself clean physically, mentally, and morally. I will always judge a teammate or an opponent as an individual, never because of race or religion. Some pretty good rules, huh? 1916, the significance of that is that's probably considered one of the worst baseball teams of all time. What happens? Well, after 1914, when they don't win the World Series, and I think Mack kind of thinks they gave up. And he also couldn't afford the payroll at this point. So he starts selling them off piece by piece until his whole team is decimated, because he did pay a lot of them quite a bit of money at the time. But unfortunately, if you don't have another source of income or other income coming in, you're not going to be able to maintain a baseball team. Fort Myers spring training, 1925 to 1936. Well, let's talk about that. But first, I just want to tell you a little bit story about Connie Mack and his spring training. When he is with the Washington Senators in 1888, for the first time, a team is going to come to Florida for their spring training, which was more of conditioning at the time. But you can imagine the weather in Washington in the winter, spring of 1888. So they come by train to Jacksonville, Florida. What is interesting is that they could not even afford to have, or the owner was so cheap that they had to share berths on the team, two to a berth. And they would have a berth for the nighttime, and then they'd have to put it away, and the owner would save a few pennies, and then they would have a different berth for the daytime. And they were rousted out of their berths at 7 o'clock every morning, so the owner could save more money, and they weren't in a sleeping berth anymore. And by the time they got to Jacksonville, he said 4 of the 14 players were drunk, reasonably sober, and the rest were drunk. They took their luggage to the hotel, but guess what? The manager of the hotel sees them and it's like, we don't allow baseball players here. And they are turned away at other hotels as well until they finally get a boarding house that agrees to take them for $1 a day and meals. They are to a bed, and they cannot associate with any of the other guests there. That is because baseball players are considered so undesirable and so lowly that nobody wanted a thing to do with them. And it's going to be till the 1920s when baseball returns to Florida on a regular basis. It starts in St. Pete, and then it comes to Fort Myers. And I'll tell you how that happens. And I forgot to put this in my bibliography, and I don't know if I'm going to be able to put it under there, but if not, I'll mention this book. It's called Under the March Sun. It's about spring training in Florida. I believe it goes up to the mid to a little bit later 2000s. So there's some information there. It's still in print if you're looking for it. So how do we get Connie Mack down here for spring training? Well, we owe our thanks to a drugstore manufacturer, pharmacy owner, excuse me, he didn't manufacture drugs. His name is Richard Q. Richards. And he thought, even though we already had Thomas Edison here in Fort Myers, we needed more publicity, more attention to get more people here. And so he starts inviting every baseball team there is to come here for their spring training. They realized baseball teams didn't have spring training the same, again, necessarily even against other teams for many years. But now it's going to happen on a regular basis. So what happens here? Connie Mack is invited by Richard Richards to come to Fort Myers and start training his team. Richard Richards owns a drugstore. And one day, lo and behold, guess what? Connie Mack came in the door. He knew that Connie Mack was most likely looking for a steady place for his team to play. They're not going to have regular places to play till after World War II. And so he talks about Fort Myers, how wonderful it is, what a great climate. Well, guess what? The only person that has any interest was Connie Mack. Nobody else brings their team here. Before that, Connie Mack's team is playing their spring training in Montgomery, Alabama. There's no other teams nearby. Now, not that Fort Myers isn't considered Fort Wilderness, as they like to say, because they had sometimes take the train to other places, but it was warm, it was consistent. And guess what? Richard Richards looks up one day, Connie Mack is there, starts talking to him, ask him to show this potential ball field, which was actually Perry Park, which had been like a county fair. It had been a country club. It was a little ways out of town, and it flopped on everything it tried there. But Connie Mack, when he showed this place by Richard Richards, this, pretty much fairgrounds, he's really interested. And Richard Richards is going to make sure that the athletics get, I believe it's $6,000 guaranteed for coming to this lovely place called Fort Myers, where they had to spread the players out in hotels, where there could be a fair going on to start, where the ball field wasn't even completely ready. But guess what? He loved it. And Fort Myers, they love Connie Mack. And you know what this is telling you? Thomas Edison loves baseball. So when the team comes to town in 1925, and there are 5 sports writers on that train, and Richard Richards had said that this is going to give us publicity that couldn't be bought. And so they begin their spring training in 1925 here in Fort Myers. And by 1926 and 27, Thomas Edison goes out to Terry Park for their practice, their spring training, not their formal games. So the first year, Connie Mack will catch for, and Kid Gleason, one of his coaches, will pitch to Edison. I mean, they lob it gently and it's not on the mound, but Edison misses the first one, strike, but the second one, he gets a hit and goes past Kid Gleason out past the first baseline. This was pretty fun, and everybody's there because, you know, baseball's pretty exciting, but Thomas Edison, he's a world famous inventor. The next year he goes out, and the Philadelphia Athletics had just acquired Ty Cobb. Ty Cobb had been with the Tigers for 18, 19 years, and he's going to spend his last 2 with the Athletics. And he will pitch to Thomas Edison halfway off the mound. He lobs one gently. Guess what? Edison hits it, and it goes into Ty Cobb, hits him in the shoulder, knocks him down, and goes on its merry way. So we know, what has he got for a batting average here? 666, 667. And Edison, ever so humble, says to Ty Cobb, "You think you can pitch like that when you're my age?" And hit like that, excuse me. And Cobb says, "I sure hope so." But Cobb, some people have dubbed the meanest man in baseball, is absolutely in awe of Thomas Edison. And so there's Ty Cobb, Thomas Edison, Connie Mack, Panama hat, full suit, always had it on. This is going to be much later in 1932. So yes, the Athletics were beloved by Fort Myers. Kiwanis had paid them $6,000. They guaranteed them $6,000 to be here. The sports writers are big in publicity. People go to those games, extremely popular. They even got a loaner of Babe Ruth from the Yankees that first year, who didn't get a home run or anything, but people came because they knew that he was going to be here. And his team is going to do amazingly well. I will tell you more about that in a little bit, but I think that as time went on, the ballpark's getting a lot long in the tooth. The team isn't that popular, renowned team that it quite was. But they will be here from 1925 to 1936, and this is at Terry Park, as was the other picture. And we'll just, and so by 1937, they have left, very sadly, and it will take us till 1940 to get the Cleveland Indians for 2 years. And then we wait till 55 to get the Pittsburgh Pirates. But it changed Fort Myers' history to have Connie Mack here. And they made the improvements that today are so rustic that Connie Mack requested at the time. But by 1936, Connie Mack's son, Earl, had also convinced him that the grass would be greener, or the playing field better, if they went to Mexico. And they're in the middle of Mexico, where there was nobody else competitively to compete against. So that only lasts 1 year. And they kind of travel around until eventually they're going to end up on the east coast of Florida. Anyways, let me talk about those glory days of his team. So here we are in 1928. In the early 1920s, Mack began assembling his next dynasty. This is after it suggested that Mack, now in his early 60s, should retire. Each year after 1922, his team began to make steady gains until 1925, when they jumped to second place. because remember, he dismantled that other dynasty. So let me back up a minute because I kind of forgot to focus on that. He had a team that won pennants in 1902 and 1905. So we can call those outliers, or we can call that his first dynasty. What's generally accepted as his second dynasty is in that time period between 1910 or even 1908 to 1914, the second dynasty, where he had 3 World Series winning teams. And then we're going to go and numerous pennants. And then we just skip ahead, and he's on the build now. He's going to have another dynasty, which we'll call either his second or third, generally accepted as the second major dynasty here. Here we're going. By the end of 1925, Mack, so he'd come back again, decimated his team after 1914 and came back again. He added future Hall of Famers Al Simmons, Jimmy Fox, Mickey Cochran, and Robert Lefty Grove, all acquired from minor league Cubs to his roster. They finished second again in 1928 and had 2 future Hall of Famers finish their career with the A's, Ty Cobb and Tris Speaker. And there's the 1928 Athletics. They're getting awful close to maybe their second dynasty here. And by the way, when they have an A''S, I know that that just what they do to shorten the Athletics. I know grammatically it's not correct, but that's what they did. So that's what I'm going to do. And there you can see Connie Mack right there. And both these men, Tris Speaker was just with him 1 year, but Cobb was with him 2, and they revered Connie Mack. Well, we're going to get that dynasty again, second or third, whatever you want to call it. The 1929 World Series, the Philadelphia Athletics won over the Chicago Cubs 4-1. Yeah, I love these programs, and they used to put the manager or the scorecard. They used to put the manager's picture on the front, and there's Connie Mack there. And here's the official scorecard in 1930 for the World Championship of the World. It's the St. Louis versus Philadelphia. And the Athletics are going to win that one 4-2 over the St. Louis Cardinals. So here's his second dynasty, and just an amazing team. So literally decimating a team, and he built back and has another one. And I write it here, second or third dynasty, 1929 to 1931. And I talked to you about this, the 1927 Yankees, who won 110 games and finished 19 and ahead of second place Philadelphia, are traditionally acclaimed as the best team ever assembled, according to most players who played in that era. The 1927 and 28 Yankees and the 1929 and 1930 Athletics matched up so closely that they were nearly equal. Was the players believing that? The A's had the nod. Now, like I said, though traditionally 1927 Yankees are considered the greatest. And there he is with one of his dynasties there. I think this is 29. The Giants called them a white elephant, meaning that nobody would want them. You know, it's something that you put like in a rummage sale you want to get rid of. It doesn't have any meaning. Connie Mack adapted it as their emblem. They weren't always standard. They could vary year to year on programs on when they had them on their jerseys. But it was kind of, he took it as and turned it around to something favorable. But what happens here? Here's a souvenir program. Those Philadelphia Athletics were at it again in 1931. They captured their 3rd straight American League pennant, winning 107 games, and pushed their 3-year victory total to 313. That was from the Sporting News. But guess what? They don't win that. They win that World Series. Don't win that World Series. They win 2, then they win the pennant, and then, well, you'll find out. Sabermetrician and baseball historian Bill James relate a story about Mack and Robert Lefty Grove, his star pitcher during the glory years of the late 20s and early 30s. Grove was a loudmouth and a hothead. His manager, Connie Mack, was a quiet, soft-spoken man who didn't drink, didn't smoke, swear, or raise his voice. In 1932, after a tough defeat, Grove was in the clubhouse raising Cain, throwing chairs, screaming at people, and menacing lockers. Finally, Connie Mack came out to try to quiet him down. Grove was having none of it. "The hell with you, Mack," he screamed. "To hell with you," to which Mack replied quietly as Grove stormed off to the shower. "And to hell with you, Robert." And that was the most he's ever said. Connie Mack, and that came from the Society of American Baseball Research, sabra.org. They have a lot of things about the athletics and Connie Mack, and that's a great resource. So they win 29-30. They don't win the World Series in 31. And guess what's going to happen? Kind of selling off the team piecemeal again. 1935, this is a picture of him with his son Earl from his first marriage, and Connie Mack Jr., or the second, whatever you want to call him. So Connie Mack had come back two times, because those first games that they got the pennant and were so close, those first years, so close to the later years. Whichever way, he does really well. He builds 2 to 3 amazing dynasties. But then what's going to happen? Let me just sidetrack things a little bit here. In December 1937, 13 years after he retired as the athletics manager, Mack was chosen for induction into the National Baseball Hall of Fame and Museum. Members were added from 1936 to 1938, and they were all inducted at the same time. I mean, this is like a brand spanking new museum here, and they were inducted in the first induction ceremony on June 12, 1939. And actually, what's interesting is, you probably recognize Babe Ruth, and that's Connie Mack. And that is a picture that they have in the Baseball Hall of Fame. And I heard somebody talk about this at the Baseball Hall of Fame. Ty Cobb should have been in this picture. But what happens, because he had been, he was an inductee. I think he was in the first class in 1936. But I could be wrong. But no matter what happens is that Ty Cobb is really sick. Excuse me. And he's in the hospital. And guess what he does? He sneaks out. He's really ill. I apologize for that. And he sneaks out, and he's going to go to the induction at the Baseball Hall of Fame. A historic moment. And he's late, and he gets off the train, and the pictures have already been taken. Plus, he shouldn't have been out of the hospital. I apologize. I have an awful tickle in my throat. How rude of me. I'm so sorry. And here's a picture in later years of Mack and Cobb at a game after Cobb is no longer a player. It's 1940. And Connie Mack is a wonderful man and loved his players dearly and cared about them greatly. But he's not going to be able to build another dynasty. And do you know why? He has no farm system. They don't have the kind of money they did before because they don't have outside sources of income. They are not going to win. They're not going to become, there's not going to be another dynasty. And this is what I said. It was synonymous with the Philadelphia Athletics. He was beloved as the grand old man of baseball. Mack won more games than any other manager, but as the years went on, there were more and more losses than wins, and fans felt it was time for him to retire. Who is now owner and manager. Like, he and his family were 100% in it. Let me explain what happened. After you realize they're winning in 1929, 1930, 1931, and we got to have depression. So the Great Depression and the highest payroll in the league caused Mack to sell off his second dynasty over the next several years. And eventually they're going to drop to last place. And in 1935, Mack had completed the dismantling of his dynasty when he traded Jimmy Fox in a 4-player trade that brought in $150,000 in cash. They were very poor for a baseball team, no outside sources of income, like attendance at games, tickets, those kind of things, pay just about everything. Baseball teams today are very diversified, pretty well. They have all kinds of things they can market and sell, and farm systems to build up their team and so on. From 1935 to 46, the Athletics finished last 9 times in 12 years. By the late 1930s, Tom and John Shibe, who partnered with Mack after their father's death, had also died, and Mack purchased their shares from John Shibe's estate that gave the Mack family a majority ownership. And it was, he had the biggest amount, Connie Mack, but various members of the family also held on to some ownership parts of the Athletics. And by the way, here's Connie Mack. This is what he's famous for. He never wears a uniform. He wears a 3-piece suit, a starched white collar. He doesn't ever come running out of the dugout. He usually has a rolled up scorecard in his hand. This is slightly less rolled up, but that's what he was noted for. And I mean, he was also known as a gentleman. I think in his career, there was only one time, maybe when he was with Pittsburgh, but he's only ejected ever once, ever. And he's known as the grand old man of baseball. He was thought so highly of, but from everything I've read, Connie Mack, without the resources to build this team up, no, people stopped watching, unfortunately. And eventually there's people that believe, baseball experts said he stayed on too long also because as he was aging, and no ageism, trust me, I'd be the last person to be that way. He had little beginnings of memory issues, things going on there. And as I said, they don't have the income. And to be quite honest, there's some fighting within his family members as well. But I will tell you, in my opinion, even though people believe he should have left a little earlier, and that might have been true this last 10 to 15 years or so, perhaps that should have happened. Probably the greatest baseball manager, in my opinion, of all time. And here's Connie Mack here. Mack is going to stay on as team president once he resigns in 1950. He was a baseball manager for 50 years. He was in organized baseball formal baseball for 65 years. I believe beyond that, another 8 years of informal, so 73 years. He stayed on as team president, though his sons took on most of the duties as he aged. Roy and Earl, his sons from his first marriage, had acquired nearly 80% of the franchise stock by August 1950, including shares from Connie Mack Jr., his son from his second marriage, after considerable disagreement among the children from the 2 marriages. And I believe my understanding is this, that Connie Mack II had the backup to buy the team and run it and maybe save it. But Connie Mack said that he had to sell it, let his older brother have first dibs, which nobody thought that those brothers, Roy and Earl, from his first marriage, were going to be able to come up with any kind of money to buy the team. But guess what? This is what happens. To purchase the shares, Roy and Earl heavily mortgaged the club through Connecticut General Life Insurance. And the club is just riddled with debt, laden with debt. And once again, they're having financial difficulties. There's no way to meet these payments. Attendance is falling. They don't have any star players. And far be it for me to criticize Connie Mack, but it's probably never good practice as a manager to also be owner, because how are you going to let yourself go? And I think he was brilliant, but maybe it was all just too much. And certainly the infighting of his family was all too much. And the future might have changed if Connie Mack II had been able to buy the team. And maybe, just maybe, they would still be in Philadelphia today. But hindsight is 2020. But this is what I do know. Attendance is falling, and they have to do something. And Connie Mack, by the way, was heartbroken when he retired, but his last few years, he was very confused. And he's a figurehead as the president until 1954. And by then, there was no going back to any family members owning it. With all that, they mortgaged the team to the hilt. They can't pay it. It is so dramatic reading about it that what we find out is this, that there's a back and forth, that there's a group that wants to keep it in Philadelphia. At first, it looked like Earl wasn't in favor of it, but then he was. But Roy had been in favor of it, but then it seemed like Roy wasn't. But whatever happens at the last minute, Roy kind of gets Earl, and that's his brother, though they were squabbling constantly. Earl had been a little bit of a player and a coach. Roy was more on the business end, but the brilliant business one, from what I could understand, was Connie Mack II. He is long gone. They have bought him out. He has come here to Florida. So there's just Roy and Earl and Connie Mack Sr. And somehow Roy gets everybody to come around, including Connie Mack Sr., and it is sold to a group. But it is not sold to the Philadelphia group, who wanted to keep it. Obviously, they had backing, and they wanted to keep it in Philadelphia. But the American League owners they're going to go along with it. And what happens is it's sold to a man that owns vending machines. And he also owns the Yankees farm team in Kansas City. And his name is Arnold Johnson. And he is going to take that team out of Philadelphia. And it is going to go to Kansas City. And they will no longer be the Philadelphia Athletics. They will be the Kansas City Athletics. When Mack heard the news, he collapsed. He rallied, but in October he fell and had a hip fracture that required surgery, and he was using a wheelchair. When he celebrated his 93rd birthday on December 22nd in early February, he fell ill at his daughter's house, and he literally fell. And let me just say that there were a lot of family dynamics. Connie Mack's health was failing. There were children from first marriage that didn't necessarily agree. There were children from the second marriage. And it was just very dramatic. And Connie Mack, the second, had moved to Fort Myers, was in the shrimping business. He'll go on to help develop Cape Coral. And Connie Mack Sr. would come here and visit the family. And this actually happens to be in Terry Park in Fort Myers when Connie Mack is visiting with Branch Rickey. Branch Rickey is with the new team that's here, the Pittsburgh Pirates. But Ricky had invited Mac to go out to the ball field. This is Terry Park. And this would be Branch Ricky's last year with the Pirates. But there they are, two baseball people that are absolutely icons of that sport. And Connie Mack will die in Philadelphia on February 8th, 1956, at the age of 93. The infighting, it was very hard on him, the team leaving to go to Kansas City, though I think he was there for opening day. And of course, I absolutely think Connie Mack is an amazing person that everybody should learn more about. There will never be a team that's quite run as the way the Philadelphia Athletics were. Well, the one thing I didn't mention also is that eventually they start letting another team use their ballpark. Shibe Park is also allowed to have the Philadelphia Phillies use it as well. So there were two teams playing out of there. And when they leave in 54, they actually keep on using it, the Phillies do, and they will use it until 1970. And in 1956, this statue was put up inside. It says Connie Mack Stadium. Where's that? Well, it was Shibe Park. But to drum up some enthusiasm for the team, Roy and Earl had it renamed Connie Mack Stadium. But this was actually at Shibe Park, Connie Mack Stadium. Public got to see it in 1957. There's Connie Mack with his scorecard there. Now the Athletics are out of that ballpark. Phillies are still there, but they move it out. So it still remains in the ballpark, but the Phillies are now done in 1970. They moved to Veterans Stadium. This statue is put outside of the ballpark there. And then it remained there until that stadium was torn down in 2004. And now it's located out of Citizens Bank, outside of Citizens Bank Park, which is the Phillies' current stadium. So that stadium remains until 1970. And it's just very sad and tragic what happened to the ballpark as well. The name was changed in 1953. And in 1938, the Phillies became tenants of Shibe Park. The last game played there was December 1st, 1970. And some young people set this on fire. You see the cupola where Connie Mack would have his office. And eventually it's left abandoned. And in 1976, it is demolished. And it's a very poignant photo I've seen in other books, the ruins of Shibe Park. And how can you find out more information about Connie Mack? Well, there I am at the Baseball Hall of Fame, sliding illegally under the rail. It looks like a little baseball on either end to stand next to one of my personal heroes, Connie Mack. I know I'm a goofball here. Connie Mack, you can find lots of information about him on the Baseball Hall of Fame. You can find information on their website. You can visit his plaque at the Baseball Hall of Fame. One of the early classes, 1937. And even better, you know where you could come? Oh, well, let me back up. I'll go to this. This is Connie Mack's record. He won 3,731 games, 7,755 total games managed. That's if we round it up, almost 49% win rate. As he stayed playing as a manager longer, his loss rate increased. but still he has won more games than any other manager ever. I think Tony La Russa has 800 something less games, fewer games than him, 7,755 games managed. There's his plaque there. I took that picture. He was a star catcher, but famed more as a manager of the Philadelphia Athletics since 1901, winner of 9 pennants and 5 World Series championships. And this is something he's very proud of. He received the Bach Award in Philadelphia in 1929, and that is recognizing his contributions to Philadelphia, and that meant more to him than anything. He had lots of honors and awards over his lifetime, but at the end of the day, he was never a wealthy man. He did not fare very well, had very little money left with all the selling of stock and things that went on with the Athletics. And of course, today, where the Athletics are. They are right now, they are in Oakland, and they are the Athletics of Moneyball, when everybody was in awe with such a small payroll. They could do so very well. But guess what? They have not got a new stadium. It's a dated stadium. When they built multi-purpose stadiums for baseball and football, their attendance has dropped. There's talk of them moving to Las Vegas yet again. I don't imagine that any of this is happy news for Connie Mack. This is the team that he started, and I hope it finds a place where it lands, where it's honored as a team, and they have players that are more. Their players right now, most of them don't have a large skill set, in my opinion. Anyway, back to this. Yes, you can go to the Baseball Hall of Fame. You should, their website, go everywhere. But you know what else you could do? Here we are. You could come to Edison Ford Winter Estates and see a wonderful little exhibit about Connie Mack and baseball. The Mack family has loaned some things for 5 years that are from their personal collection. These are from Shibe Park. There's stadium seats. There's pictures. There's items. Did you know that Connie Mack went with a group of players, managers to Japan for an exhibition there? Just so many amazing things. In fact, we had a soft opening for the Mack family a couple of weeks ago, and Senator Mack said that somebody was trying to get a ticket to that game and they couldn't. They had their little boy with them, and Senator Mack saw, I guess the little boy, I can't remember the story exactly, but the child was upset, or the gentleman was upset and couldn't go to the game. So guess what? They took the little boy and put him, or toddler, in the car that Connie Mack was riding, and got him into the game. And the little young man sat between Connie Mack and Babe Ruth, which tells you everything you need to know about Connie Mack. He was a gentleman, cared about the fans. He cared about baseball. Oh, there's just another little thing. This is from our exhibit. There's Connie Mack with that scorecard, and that says Fanatics. It talks about Edison and Mack in baseball. In Fort Myers, there's a little bit about the other teams that have been here as well, but this is really a tribute to the Athletics, and particularly Connie Mack. The McGillicuddy family, because that's their true name, are lovely people. They had senators, congressmen, scientists, all kinds of wonderful people that are part of the McGillicuddy family that have been gracious enough to loan these items. And you should come visit. And my name is Holly. And if you ask for me, I will tell you as much as I know about Connie Mack and baseball. There's so much more I couldn't say. I had to leave so much out when you have a career like his. And in his living room, Hall of Fame manager Joe McCarthy, who was with the Yankees and also the Red Sox, had nothing about baseball except 2 pictures. One was a picture of Lou Gehrig with the words, "May I always deserve your friendship." The other was a picture of Connie Mack. On it, Mr. Mack had penned a simple inscription, to a great manager and friend. As Ted looked at Connie Mack's picture, McCarthy said, "You're wrong about me, Ted. There was the greatest manager of all time." And he's not referring to himself. He's referring to Connie Mack. And that is from a book about Joe McCarthy, architect of Yankee Dynasty. And that's a quote from it. And my quote from Connie Mack is, "Humanity is the keystone that holds nations and men together. When that collapses, the whole structure crumbles. That is as true of baseball teams as any other pursuit in life." Connie Mack, this is where he's buried in Holy Sepulchre Cemetery, and I don't know, Cheltenham Township, Pennsylvania. But he is a New England man at heart. These are some of the sources that I used. There is a 3-part biography of Mack, 3 parts, hundreds of pages. Sabra has a lot of good articles. There's also a little bit in a book that I forgot to add on there that's Under the March Sun by Charles Fountain that talks about spring training here. I hope you'll come visit our exhibit. I think you'll greatly enjoy it. And if you get a chance, go to Baseball Hall of Fame, one of my favorite places. They do have an amazing website. Next month, we'll be talking about Edison and the Naval Consulting Board and the Naval Research Laboratory. It is the second Tuesday in June. I don't happen to remember the date, but I hope you'll join me. And we also have a Step into History digital edition on the first Wednesday of the month, and Bailey will be giving that. I'll just check and see if you have any questions. Thank you. What great information. And oh, thank you. My husband said I did a good job. He's non-objective. If anybody has any questions, and this will be on YouTube, I hope that you're able to join that as well. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. And you know what? If you remember anything, not only was Connie Mack a great baseball player, he was a kind and generous human being. I didn't even get to tell you how many people he helped. Thank you so much. See you next month.